Starting Point Coaching and Consulting presents Kairos Conversations, Connecting with Quality, the podcast. Kairos is Greek for the right time, the right season, the right opportunity. This podcast features healthcare quality professionals who share their journeys, their advice, their struggles, how they made that transition into a new and exciting role. My heart's desire is that you find this podcast to be inspirational to you as you make your own journey. Don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues and friends and rate us on whichever podcast platform you listen to. Thank you for being here. I'm here today with my guest, Lauren Rosenthal. So thank you so much for being here today, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this.
All right, so let's start with introducing yourself to the audience.
For sure. So I'm Lauren Rosenthal. I have a background in occupational therapy. I graduated back in 2013 with my OT degree and have just recently, within the last 6 months, transitioned into the data analysis space. So totally different, a realm, arena, whatever you want to call it. But, I'm excited to kind of share my story and talk to you about all the things and how I can help other people get to maybe where I am.
Awesome. And before we get deep into your journey, tell the audience how we know each other.
We met through LinkedIn. So I think that you reached out a few months ago, at least. And we've had a couple of conversations, and I totally, as I want to do, forget to reply to people on LinkedIn. So I'm glad that I finally went back and searched through all my messages, and I remembered your name and your message. And I was like, oh no, I forgot to do this. So I'm really glad that our conversation stuck out in my head, because otherwise I don't think I'd be here. I'm
so glad it did too. And I'm glad you reached back out. And I wanted people to know that, because I've talked to so many people about the benefits of LinkedIn and networking, and have met people online, offline, who have become colleagues and friends and collaborators. And I think that some people just don't realize how valuable the LinkedIn platform can be. And it's different than other platforms, right?
Oh, completely. I mean, LinkedIn is the only real social media that I take part in, which is so funny because I have not a huge following of people, but enough people following me that it's, I've told my mom before, and she's like, whoa, what? Why are people following you? What does that mean? But, it's been so cool to actually reach out and make connections with people that feel more real and more quality than some of the Facebook connections, or just the Instagram follows. I've had conversations with people, and to some extent it's kind of helped me get my current job, which is crazy.
The same thing for me. I've got my current job by connecting with a recruiter on LinkedIn. I've made a lot more meaningful connections in some of the other platforms, so it's been remarkable. So let's talk about your journey. All right, OT 2013. When did you decide that it was not for you anymore?
I would say within the first 2 months of my first job. My first job was in a school for students who had emotional disabilities, and most of them lived on campus all the time. And I was super excited to get started there. And then for whatever reason, it just never felt like a good fit. And I didn't have the right support that I really wish that I would have had coming into my first OT job. And so within 4 months of that job, I had actually quit. And I remember I was still living with my parents at that point. And I remember going home and being like, Mom, I think I made a big mistake. So that was kind of the first big red flag of, oh, whoops, maybe this was not my best choice. So I think from that point on, I kind of always felt like this was not, this was never going to be my forever career. And I think a lot of other people in our space in particular kind of get the same feedback. And I still see it today on alternative career Facebook groups and stuff, where it's oh no, I don't like what I'm doing. And people are like, well, have you tried this setting? Have you tried that setting? Have you done this? Have you all of the different things. And so I left that job, decided to pick up and move from Pennsylvania to Colorado. And I got a job at a skilled nursing facility out there. I stayed there for about a year and loved my coworkers, hated the job. I did pediatric home health in Colorado, which was kind of cool because Colorado has a cool way of doing things where it's, I want to say 0 to 18 is pediatric. You can get pediatric home health, which is not typical any other places. So that was another one where I wasn't miserable, but I also knew that that was not I didn't want to do that to myself for the next however long. Like I was putting tons of miles on my car. I had back pain and shoulder pain all the time because I was driving so much. And that was just 2 years of my life. So that was kind of where I thought like maybe pediatrics was where I wanted to go. So I ended up moving back to Pennsylvania to be close to my family after that. And I got into a school setting. So I was in schools for 5 years, basically. And I think, the biggest reason I lasted as long as I did was because of my coworkers and my colleagues. Like I really enjoyed the people that I worked with. But, even my real decision to leave when I knew for sure, like, I've tried things, I haven't found anything like that happened about 5 years ago when I was really starting to consider what else can I do with this degree and with my skill set. And it just kind of took me 5 years from that point to like really make the move.
What were you thinking at first? So you said, I don't want to do OT. I don't want to do pediatrics and I want to do something else. What did you start looking into at that time?
So I think that like my ideal would have always been tech-based. And so when I moved back to Pennsylvania, I kind of had time to research and I came across this thing called UX design and I had never heard of it before. It's the UX is user experience. And so basically that is looking at how people interact with different websites and trying to make it as intuitive and easy as possible for those people. And like coming from a background where that's essentially what we do with our everyday lives is trying to help people succeed, meet whatever they're trying to do. It seemed like that would be a really cool use of my skill set. And I was really interested in it for a while. So I took a UX boot camp and that was back in 2017. And then I got scared off. I started doing the research and I was, on UX subreddits and I was seeing how hard everybody said it was to get your first job and how you need a portfolio of projects. And I like just felt so overwhelmed that I stopped. Like I finished the boot camp and that was the end of it. I did not apply to a single job. And I kind of dropped it for a little while and I was like, all right, well, this is, if I'm not willing to put in the work, obviously this is not where I'm meant to go. So then I thought maybe like front end web development. So things like HTML, CSS, building actual websites was kind of going to be the thing. And somewhat similar, I did not spend the same money on a boot camp because I didn't succeed the first time around, but I took courses and I liked HTML and I liked CSS and I liked all of those like coding languages. And then I got to a certain point and I just kind of put it to the side and never picked it back up. And so I think that the biggest impetus for me actually making this move is I was at a school and I was lucky enough to only be at one school where I'm sure many OTs are, as actually many OTs and PTs especially know that like if you're in a school, typically you're in 5 schools per week. But I was in a school and I was lucky enough to only be in one. And I had a great group of people that I was working with. And they all kind of slowly started leaving. One of them moved away. Another one, my special ed director left. And I realized the only thing that had kept me in OT and at that particular place for so long was the people I was working with. And that was not a place where I wanted to be anymore. I wanted to enjoy the work enough that it didn't matter who I was working with. Like the people would be a perk. The job would be what I really wanted to do. So that was kind of like where it finally hit me that like this is actually something I need to be really serious about and think about. And I just happened to stumble upon data analysis at the very, very right time.
Now, what do you mean by the right time?
I started thinking about where I really wanted to be. I will say that like COVID kind of put a pause on all these plans because working at a school, I was home for almost a year and a couple of things happened for me during that time. I realized I loved working from home. I loved being able to be in my own space. But at that point in time, my job was so low key. I had so many students not come to my sessions and I was still getting paid for that time. And so it didn't feel like the same like mental load. So I was kind of just like floating through a little bit. And I went back to in-person school. My best friend had moved at that point from the school. And back in January, when I really found data analysis, I had just learned that my special ed director was leaving. She was definitely gone. And the counselor that I was really close to, she was going to leave. And, those were my big three people at the school. And so it really made me start to be like, wow, this is not a place that I want to be without this support. And so I think that's kind of what I mean by right time, right place. Like it just happened to coincide with a lot of other changes and a lot of other people leaving. And it finally made me be like, wow, this needs to be something that I'd think about.
Right. So I'm curious to know, and I'm sure our audience may be curious as well. You chose data analytics, but then chose to get out of healthcare altogether. Not data in healthcare, which some people do, clinical data related to patient care and outcomes and those kind of things. What made you leave healthcare altogether?
I think I was a little bit jaded. I think that I was over healthcare. I really felt like I was frustrated with our system and I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. What's really interesting for me though is so I was in a school and I was still doing OT obviously at the school, but I enjoyed teaching and I really liked being able to help guide people in that way. So when I looked at data, my first data job, which, was actually also only about 3 months, it was in health insurance and it was great. But again, part of that was because I do find data very interesting and I like being able to do it. But again, it was partially the people that I was working with that were awesome. And at the same time, being at a health insurance company, I almost felt like I was contributing to this healthcare problem that we have. Because it was, I was looking at healthcare claims and all of this stuff that I was just on the other side of the system that I found frustrating. And it kind of made me be, so I was able to find this position that I'm at now where I still can do data, but I also can kind of tie in that enjoyment of helping other people and helping help teach them. And so I think I'm coming almost from the other side of OT where it's you can be in a hospital, a skilled nursing facility, whatever, or you can be on that kind of school side of things. And so, obviously the schools is much less healthcare based. It's a lot of fine motor skills, sensory integration, that kind of stuff. So I kind of think that even when I was out of school, I was taking a step back from healthcare, if that makes sense. It was much less medical based.
So what do you do within data now?
I actually just started a new job last week. So I'm still I'm kind of.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It was unexpected to say the least. I am currently doing a couple of different things. So I work for an ed tech company, which is kind of, I think, what my end goal was always going to be. That was where I was applying when I first started applying for data jobs, and I just wasn't getting a response. So I'm at an ed tech company that actually teaches data analysis. So I am doing a couple of things. I'm helping students when they're learning SQL. So that's the main language that I write queries in. So I'm doing that. I am working on some of the data analysis for the actual company. So seeing what's driving their, the traffic on their site, seeing what kind of return on investment we get and all of that stuff. And then I'm also working kind of as an account executive for them. So working with the companies they contract with to help those companies' employees learn data. So it's kind of a mishmash of things, and it's not purely data analysis anymore, which I think is so interesting because that was originally what I intended, was to be doing data analysis full time. And that quickly is not what actually ended up happening.
Yeah, it seems like it's a lot of variety. Do you think you'll like the variety?
I think so. So the company I'm with now is a startup. And just to give a little bit of background, the first company I was with, the health insurance company, was 2,500 employees, maybe. It started out as a startup and has now become bigger. And I was purely doing that data stuff, and I was just working on data. And as a first job, it was great, and I learned a ton. And then this new company is, I want to say, less than 40 employees. It's very much startup culture. And I realized being at that health insurance company that I do enjoy the variety. I enjoy kind of being involved more in knowing what's going on, why we're making the decisions we're making. And so I think all of that combined with the fact that I do enjoy kind of having different jobs and different responsibilities, I do think it'll be a good fit.
Okay.
Hi, friend. Are you listening to this podcast wondering how you can start your own journey into healthcare quality? Or maybe you've already started, but you're hitting some roadblocks and getting stuck at the application process. Well, my friend, I've got a free resource for you. After you finish listening to this episode, head on over to my website and grab the ebook, Top 3 Mistakes Clinicians Make When Transitioning into a Non-Clinical Role. The link will be in the show notes section. Now, enjoy the rest of the episode.
Well, let's go back a little bit and talk about how long it took you from the time. So you initially were doing or thinking about UX. Mm-hmm. One thing I love is that you continuously invested in yourself. But then you said, okay, UX is not it. I'm going to do data. From the time that decision was made, that data is where you wanted to go. How long did it take you to get your first job in data?
I'm sure I knew in some part of my head that data analytics was a thing that existed, but I always kind of say the easy way I can explain it is I learned about data analytics back in maybe January of 2022. So just about a year ago, I came across a TikTok talking about data analytics, and the girl was talking about how she got into it without having a degree in it. And she went from making, I don't know, $70,000 to $160,000 a year in 4 years. And
that sounds really nice.
I had been making the same amount for 5 years. And so I was like, whoa, that's cool. And she started talking about SQL and what she did with it. And I thought that sounded really interesting. So that was back in January. I started kind of really looking at data in, I would say, February of 2022. And then I started applying for jobs in June or early July. I was not expecting to get a job as quickly as I did because one of the first companies I interviewed with was the health insurance company. And that happened mid-August, and they offered me a job. So I started my first data job in mid-September. So it took me about 9.5 months from the time that I was data's it to I started my first job.
Okay. So what do you think contributed to your transition the most?
I think a couple of different things. I do think that I was able to figure out a course of action that taught me the skills that I needed. So I did do a couple of different certificate programs, and I did the Google Data Analytics certificate, which is a big one. And then I did a certificate called Break Into Tech, which was one that I had found through the same girl's TikTok, actually. So that helped a lot. But I think that more than anything, it was about what I did after that. So I networked a lot on LinkedIn. I did projects to kind of show, I didn't just list on my resume, yes, I know this, this, and this. I was able to kind of demonstrate, here are the skills that I'm telling you that I know, and here's how I can show you that I know them. And I think that I applied to the right kind of jobs. So I did leverage my healthcare background. And that, I think, is how I ended up at a health insurance company to start with, because I was able to say, no, I don't have that same level of skill, maybe in data analytics, but I do have a healthcare background. And I think that can be really beneficial to the company. So I think it was a lot of that, but it was also, and I hate to say it because it just happens that it was also kind of right time, right place, luck kind of thing. It was this particular company saw my resume and my cover letter, and they were willing to give me a chance to interview. And before I left that company, I talked to the manager and I was like, how did you decide that you were going to offer me a job knowing that I didn't have this experience? And he basically said, you interviewed well. So it's a little bit hard for me to be let me pinpoint exactly what contributed, because part of it was luck and part of it was apparently the fact that I did interview well, which was a little bit of a surprise to me, but it just so happens that was kind of the way it went.
But it's so interesting because I tell my clients all the time, and I tell clinicians all the time, that you have to really be able to demonstrate the skill on your resume versus just saying that you have this skill, and having portfolios and projects and stuff like that helps. And so I like to say that the job of the resume is to get you to the interview. So yes, you did interview well, but something got you to that point that they decided to give you an interview, right?
Right.
And so I personally think it was having those projects that showed what you were able to do based on the courses that you took, not just that you had this random certification that you never used, right?
Definitely. And that also not only did the projects help me kind of say here, look at my skills, I can do this. They also gave me a ton of confidence going into the interview, knowing that I was going to be asked about them and being able to say yep, this is the data set that I worked with. This is how I cleaned it. This is how I prepared it. This is, these are the queries that I ran to find out X, Y, and Z answer. Like, it just gave me a lot of confidence to say, yes, I know what I'm doing. Yeah. So that was a big one for me. And I also I do think that part of being able to get your foot in the door with that resume is making it sound more like what you're applying for. So I had to do a lot of work going back into my resume and trying to figure out ways to make what I was doing sound more data-based, was challenging, but that might have actually been one of the harder parts for me, is just trying to figure out how to frame my experience in a more analytical way to say I don't have the skill. I don't have the title of data analyst in these roles, but to some extent that was what I was doing.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, because a lot of clinicians or people who are even moving out of patient care, they focus their resumes on how many patients did I see and what populations were they and what settings. And I like that you said that you took what you were doing in the clinical role and said, this is how I was also doing data with that.
Right. And for data in particular, I feel like healthcare professionals have so much that we have to think about. We have to worry about how many patients are making progress, what percentage of progress, are they going from 50% independent to 95% independent? How am I tracking that? What does my data look like in itself? Am I dealing with EMR? Am I dealing with all of these systems that involve data? And then kind of going from there and trying to think, okay, how can I frame this in a way that puts those parts of my job responsibilities and my job duties on display?
Yeah, I think that's huge. I'm so glad you shared that, because I think that's what probably helped to get you to that interview. And then you were able to rock the interview because you were confident and you knew what you were talking about, and they liked your personality and your fit and whatever else they were looking for. But once I get to that point for them to even make the decision that we want to hire Lauren.
Yeah. And it definitely, the interview, or not the interview, I'm sorry, the resume was a huge part. And I did have a resume. She's not a resume writer, but I had a resume reviewer kind of go over my resume with me and kind of help me figure out different ways to frame what I was doing. And that was truly it was worthwhile and it was helpful for me. It's funny because the resume that she and I worked on together was actually post applying to this job. So it is now an even more strong resume, but it is not the resume I used to apply to that job.
That's very interesting. So you had a good resume, and then that person who helped you helped make it better.
Yeah. And she also she helped me think about things she has a very, very interesting way of approaching resumes. She's not a person who says, take everything off that's 10 years old or older. She's kind of a person who says, if you can use an experience that you had back in college that really demonstrates this skill, put it on there.
Right.
Use everything you can. And so one of the things that we talked about was I had written a couple of LinkedIn articles with another healthcare professional who was leaving. Mm-hmm. And I said, is this something that I should showcase on my resume? And she was like, absolutely, put that on there. Talk about how you've written articles, talk about how you're doing all of these things on LinkedIn. That can only help. And it was just it was a good background for me. It was good knowledge for me to have, even if it wasn't what I ended up using on, I didn't need to use that on my resume, but I'm glad that I now have that.
But you were able to also speak to it. I don't know if it came up in the interview or if it's something that you were able to use as an experience or an example or something, but you had that to pull from too, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it was very helpful.
Okay. So what advice would you give someone who wants to do what you do?
So I would definitely say start working on courses. I think that the big thing is always you need Excel, SQL, and some kind of data visualization tool. So a course or courses that encompass all of that. Start working as soon as you can on projects. So find a data set that interests you, or find a data set that you can work with and put what you're learning to that project and show that you have the skills. And at the same time, it kind of reinforces your learning. I would say start networking on LinkedIn, reach out to other data analysts who are, who have transitioned or who are in that field, and talk to them about what their day-to-day looks like. Make sure it's something that really interests you. Ask any data analyst for any advice, because one of the things that I've seen is that we all get to the same place in such vastly different ways. Like there are plenty of people that I've spoken to who started out as a teacher or started out as, one of the people that I talk to a lot, her name is Annie, and she was an OT student and she found data in the middle of her grad school, and she got into data after grad school. She didn't even go into OT. But, so many of us get to this position in a different way. And so there's so many different paths you can take. So talk to as many people as you can and try to kind of determine what path works for you. Revamp the resume. Make sure that you're showcasing those data skills that you definitely have. You just maybe are not showcasing and displaying in the right way right now. And I think that applying strategically to jobs, make sure that it's a company that you would be interested in working for, but play to your strengths. I think that one of the things that I realized was that first job, as long as it gets your foot in the door, it does not have to be your forever job.
Right.
I knew very, very early on that at some point in time, I would want to be out of the healthcare space entirely. And I didn't think it was going to happen quite as quickly as it did. But I also knew healthcare is getting into a health insurance company is a great way for me to leverage the skills that I already possess. So I think it's a combination of all those things: learning the skills, demonstrating the skills, networking, doing all of that stuff, and really figure out what the path is and then follow that path. One of the things that I did that I would not recommend people do is I took probably 8 different courses on SQL. And it always started from the very, very, very beginning. And once you learn that very first SQL statement, you do not need to go back and relearn it 7 times because it's going to be the exact same thing. And I didn't really have that strategic course plotted out of, okay, I'm going to take this course and then this course and then this course, and then I'm going to start applying. It was let me do this tutorial, that Udemy course, this certificate program, this tutorial. And it kind of it worked out for me in the end, but it was definitely not the straightest line from learning to job.
Yeah, I like that you said to be strategic, because I find that a lot of people, when they want to get out of healthcare or want to get away from the bedside, they just start throwing darts at the wind, and they're applying at all these places, and it gets frustrating because they don't have a clear path or they don't really know what direction, and they kind of want the employer to figure out where they can fit versus I know where I want to fit and where I think my skills align, and therefore I'm going to apply for this position with this company.
And I get being so ready to get out of healthcare or get out of, bedside care, that you're willing to kind of just do anything. But clicking the easy apply button on LinkedIn to 150 different jobs is not going to get you the job that you want. And I think you're right, being strategic and trying to figure out exactly what you want to do, while it might take you a little bit longer, I think that you're going to find that you're more successful in honing in on what you want to do and what steps you need to take to get there.
Okay. Do you think that you'll keep your OT license, or do you think you will kind of let it go now that you're not in healthcare?
I still have a very real fear of at some point ending up needing it again. So I will, at least for now, keep it. I did put a lot of really hard work and time and money into getting the degree. And if I let go of the license and ever needed to take the boards again, I don't know that I would pass at this point in time.
Same. I do not want to take the boards again. I will keep my PC license until I can't keep it anymore.
I'm kind of already dreading the fact that I'm going to need a lot of continuing ed in the next couple of months to maintain. But I also my plan as of now is to keep it. My preference would be not to ever go back into that field, but having the support and the background of knowing it's there just in case is probably worth it.
Yeah. And I know we're in different states, but just as a side note, I know that in Georgia, for physical therapy, at least, they count other things other than just direct patient care CEUs. And some of it doesn't even have to be labeled as a CEU to count towards the license. So I would encourage you to look to see if all those data courses that you took can translate to your OT license, because that may save you so much time. And I know that's kind of off topic, but look into your state to see, if some of that would be transferable so that you don't have to now take a bunch of courses, random courses, right?
For sure. No, I absolutely will. I know I had a friend at one point who's an OT. I think she like did it, but a little bit backwards. Like she said she took all these courses and then they came back to her and they're like, okay, well, you need to prove that these are like related to your degree or to your license. So maybe like doing it the other way around and making sure I can use those courses first would be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So last question, how can my network support you and the work that you do or get in touch with you?
So I think that at this point in time, like, honestly, for me, it's more about supporting other people and getting where they want to be. Like I said, I take a ton of like satisfaction in helping other people and answering questions. Even if I'm not always the best at getting back on LinkedIn, like sooner or later, I will reply.
Yes, it's good for me.
Yeah. So I think if people want to follow me on LinkedIn at Lauren Rosenthal, or if you want to message me and ask questions, I am so happy to talk about my journey and what I did and what I would maybe do differently the next time around. But yeah, if people want to follow me and get in touch, connect with me, I would be more than happy to talk anytime.
Awesome. Well, Lauren, I thank you so much for being here. Thank you for responding to my message on LinkedIn. And I mean, I've just really enjoyed our conversation. And I know you've been having some other talks too that people have listened to. So if you haven't seen Lauren before this recording, then check her out on LinkedIn because there's some other talks that she's had too.
Thank you so much for joining in. Your support means everything. Be sure to subscribe to the show, share this episode with your friends and colleagues, and rate the podcast on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. I'd love to hear from you, so find me on LinkedIn at BrandyDPT or on my website at www.definingpointcc.com. Enjoy the rest of your day.